Every great campaign needs a villain worth fearing, but most villains, they're a little flat. They're evil for evil's sake. They're nothing more than a name or a stat block or just a scary quote, and then boom, final fight, done and forgotten. Well, today we're gonna fix that. Here's how I build a memorable evolving BBEG or Big Bad Evil Guy in 3 acts, so that it feels just like a cinematic story arc with all the room that you need as a DM to improv, to adapt, and let's be honest, cry between sessions. Let's go. When you start your campaign, you will be in what I like to consider the introduction phase of your world, or Act 1. This is where all the fun, adventuring, and exploring is done. Now, quick sidebar here, whenever I use the term act or story in this video, I use it loosely as a sort of set of notes that I bring to the table each and every session, but like really extensive notes that are way too overly prepared for no reason at all, with a list of all the probable outcomes of the story with the current events. You know, like a psycho, but a friendly psycho. So I might not know what exactly the midpoint of my story is, but I know what I'd like for it to be. And I know what it's looking like it's going to be if things stay status quo. And more importantly, for the sake of this video, I always know who I want my main villain to be. Now, a bad guy might start as a simple idea for me, like Shadowfell, or the Blood War spilling into the material plane, or... And when the players do something different than expected, then hey, guess what? They didn't ruin my plans. No, they just branched off into a new timeline and are living in a new reality, and I, as the DM, get to figure out how they messed everything up down the road, but it's okay, I love this, right? You see, as a DM, as a storyteller, I like to write what I know. I build on pre-existing story structures that I know because of my background as a screenwriter and a filmmaker. I consider my love for film as my personal touch on my games. DMs with a love for fashion might hyper-focus on the way dresses look in the city or the clothing styles of the locals because that's what they love. The same will go for musicians that are narrating a bard playing compared to someone who doesn't play an instrument. Writing and filmmaking is what I know, so that is what I bring to the table for my players, and that means writing good villains, which is why we're here. That was a long sidebar. Now, why does all of this talk about structure matter for a D&D villain? Well, the 3-act structure helps me sort of keep a pulse on the story that we are building at the table, and more importantly, how the bad guy or guys or will react. And to get to the main point here, I do that because that emotional and energetic rise and fall that happens when following one of these structures or these beat boards or whatever is the key to pacing your bad guys and timing the moments that they appear in the same way that someone times the ghost stories they share around a campfire. Now, I say all of that because this entire video assumes that you run your games just like that, or at the very least that you want your villain to feel like that, to follow that character arc that we see in movies that make us like villains and love to hate them. And if you don't like that style, that's okay. You don't have to watch the rest of this video or leave that comment. You don't have to do anything. You have nothing to prove. You can fully commit to just leaving peacefully and... Okay, well, me then. Now, for the first long while of your game, and I mean long while, you're going to be in the exploring phase, like I said, right? The introduction phase. Your players are going to meet bad guys and good guys. They will probably encounter a few dungeons, travel town to town, maybe see a city, maybe a thieves guild, and if you're lucky, they might get some gold here and there, and maybe a magic item or two. For this part of the campaign, I like to call my evil guy the shadow in the walls, right? That is Act 1. The goal for this phase is to make your villain mysterious and enigmatic and secretive and pique the interest of your players. This is the whispers and warnings kind of phase, right? The party doesn't meet them, at least not directly, but their presence is felt. Well, how do you do this? Well, you can have the villain's name spoken in fear, right? We can meet Voldemort before we've met him, just like they do in the Harry Potter movies. You can also drop rumors or signs and consequences of their actions. And you can also show NPCs reacting to that influence of the bad guy. Let players feel the fear before they see the source. And in movies, the scariest parts of the horror film are all the times that we almost saw the monster but never did. At least that's how I feel about it. Now, for example, a town could be abandoned, and as the players are walking through it, the crops are rotting, and the only thing that's left behind is a burned sigil into the ground. It's the same sigil that keeps showing up in other towns. The players know that there's something big coming. Not when, not how, not who, but they know. And this is a really fun phase for players because, first of all, let's get the obvious out of the way. They know what's coming, right? They're playing D&D after all. Of course they're expecting this, but that doesn't make it any less fun in the same way that watching horror films is no less fun simply because you know all the crazy, scary scenes and the tropes that you're about to see, right? Right. So for players, getting a chance to see how you put your own spin and touch on your villains is fun, and it's also a new experience every time. And beyond that, guessing which baddie it could possibly be, which god you decided to put into this campaign, is possibly just as fun. So lean into it, go a few sessions without hearing that bad guy's name or getting wind of them. Make them think they're safe and then make them cry. Okay, too much? I do it at specific times or after some personal achievements, like maybe they just robbed a museum that they've been planning to rob for several sessions, so they're feeling elated, they're feeling happy. Well, I might end the final session of that heist with the first whisper, this glance into the shadow in the walls, right? And this has a unique effect because one, it makes the players think that they are uncovering something, that their actions did this because hint, hint, it did. This is where you connect the museum heist or the curator or an artifact or the benefactor or something to a player or the players. And then second, it also makes story, the plot point, feel more natural, right? It's like a big win and then a small loss, positive with a negative. And in that same vein, I will also always take a period of darkness and give them some reprieve by having them meet someone that can help them, or a fun NPC that lightens the mood. You can't have it always be bubbly or it gets boring, and you can't have it always be dark or it gets stressful. So the BBEG sort of becomes this consistent touch point and reminder for the party that big things are coming. Every time it pokes them, things get a little darker and a little darker, and they are still off fighting other things, right? They're fighting goblins and orcs and gnolls and bandits and thieves, and they're making a splash and causing waves, but in the background, there's this other thing that's growing, and every once in a while, it'll remind them that it's there, and this gets them excited session after session because they're going towards a goal. Now, eventually, you will crawl out of that low-level miasma and onto the beaches of what I call Act 2. And I will arbitrarily decide when it's time to shift the direction of the story. Usually, it's after some big win, not quite as small as the heist, but nothing too crazy either. So maybe after they kill their first dragon or something like that. It needs to be a moment where the party is starting to feel strong to you as the DM. And for me, that's usually around level 5, because for those experienced DMs out there, level 5 is where you get a lot of new spells that get added to, and they unlock these new abilities. And so it just feels right, but that's also assuming that you're going up to level 20, because if you're playing a game and you know in your head, I'm only gonna go up to level 10, then you might want to do it a little sooner. So you can make that call, and over time, as you get better as a DM, that skill that determines when to do that gets sharper, and you learn to read the flow of the narrative a little more. But when it feels like it's the right time, when you feel like you're out of the intro phase and it's gone on long enough and you want to start exploring the larger story and the larger world of Act 2, then that's the point where I'll drop one more whisper, one more hint of the bad guy, but this time I do it big. This is what I call the point of no return, and hint, hint, again, this is going back to those structures that I know. Now, the bad guy needs to make themselves apparent. So maybe they'll kill someone that the party is close to, or there's a betrayal, or the party meets one of their lieutenants for the first time, or accidentally kills one, and that's what pisses off the BBEG. Whatever you decide, the moment needs to be powerful enough that it becomes personal to them, and that the bad guy is now not just a name, but now a distant enemy, something that they know they're going to come to a head with. And this is important, at least to me, because it's one of those subtle techniques that you can use to force a party together, especially the weird ones. And you know who you are. It's usually the parties that consist of like an edgelord rogue, a snobby wizard, the bang bang guy, and like a turtle. By making an enemy sort of hone in on them like that, they sort of have to work together, and it becomes that much easier. It pushes them in one more direction to where the role-playing of that friendship between the characters has one less barrier in the way, because narratively it makes sense, so that objection in their head kind of disappears. So that big reveal is the transition from Act 1 to Act 2, at least for me. And that just feels like a bookmark moment. You can close that chapter, move on to a new section of the story, and it feels natural because all of that role-playing and narration and storytelling that we've done is done following a rhythm, which are those acts that are at the table that I make a note of, and I fill in the blanks, and session to session decide what the next logical plot point would be, even if it's just winging it, and believe me, most of the time I'm winging it. Now, Act 2 is where I start to create not just a disembodied villain, but an actual character. And so that's where we move into officially Act 2, which is the human under the monster, or I guess it really should be the person? The soul under the monster? Whatever. So the main goal for this next long and difficult journey is to show the party why the villain is the way that they are. And this can take 85% of the rest of the campaign, which means it takes anywhere from my game never began to we still play 50 years later, so buckle the fuck up. This part of the story is where the villain goes from evil boss fight to character in the story, and you do this a few different ways. And you can do this through actions and through them verbally saying things, as you do. You know, you show the villain's philosophy or motivation. So to me, I will destroy all is just sort of cheesy. I don't know. I would expect a profoundly endless elder being to have a little more nuance and a little more depth, so an enemy that says I'm doing this for you becomes way more interesting, right? It's not just booga booga, it has thoughts and sentience and holy shit, compelling reasons that don't sound too far off from the truth. And you can also do this by revealing something personal about the bad guy. So this can be pain, love, betrayal. It just needs to be something real. It doesn't have to be I want to bring back my loved one. Not every creature or being will have known known love, but a dragon that's gone wild with rage that becomes the main centerpiece of your story, well, then maybe they are mad with rage because their sibling was slain or something. That is also very compelling, and it is an interesting history for your players to uncover, and ultimately, that's because while there are varying levels of loss from like losing a lover to losing a sibling, or everything in between, right, or outside of that spectrum, we all understand loss at its core. Even BBEGs. And I know this sounds cheesy, but one really great villain that feels like a powerful ancient being while still also being emotional, and it's an emotion that we can latch onto, is Te Fiti in Moana, right? When you see that sort of godlike power, we can feel the pain, we can feel the rage in the way that the character moves and the way that they behave, and that's what we want to try to convey, emotion, even if it's endless rage or eternal darkness, right? Rage can be heartbreaking to watch, and eternal darkness can be lonely. So another great way to giving a villain some character is to create mirrored goals between the party and the BBEG, which just means trying to get your players' characters to think, if I were in their shoes, would I do the same thing? They both want to save the city or save the world. They want to be free, but those end goals look different for each of them, and it's that difference that creates conflict that we latch onto because we love drama. That is what makes a villain really stick. Not power, not scars, not the voice, conviction. So you do that, you make the villain a character, you do that again and again, you remind the party that the villain is there, and then one day they do something that pisses off the villain too much, and this is what I would call the midpoint of the villain's character arc. The villain is now pissed, the party stopped a ritual, or they sacked a temple, or they took out a commander, and now it's personal. So the last half of Act 2 becomes this constant build, like a growing wave. So I might have a wild encounter planned for them, a deadly one, that to show them that the bad guy isn't playing. This is one of those encounters that I design where I go into the session wondering if they might lose a player character. And if and when they survive that, then every few sessions the party will start to wonder, will they come back? Is today the day they attack again? And you have that ever-growing fear and doubt because that's what you want. It's a BBEG, right? You're getting into the climax area, right? You're going from Act 2 into Act 3. You can't have a BBEG without that existential dread. You need that in order to really get to the point where you can build to the climactic final battle. And you might have a little lull, some easier fights, and then another crest of the wave where the cultists show up or the BBEG reaches out and talks to them, and then back to the smaller stories again. And your goal from that point forward is to increase the stakes. More stakes! Every session, every encounter, a tiny nudge in the direction of impending doom. More news about dark stuff happening. Another NPC with tales or quests. An evil commander looking for an artifact nearby for the BBEG. Stakes! Of course, there are still other stories happening. While there are whole sessions without the BBEG, eventually you start pulling more and more away from those side stories as they get resolved, as they get tied up, and you might add another big moment or a turning point into the story, another mini boss, another dungeon, but eventually all missions come down to one, and then there is but one goal, one last mission to complete, and you start dropping hints of things happening far away, and then things happening closer, and then next door, and then, like a wall of text coming out of nowhere that says Act 3, it's Act 3. The big thing to know going into this one is that you are increasing stakes, not to just do that, but because you want the party to be stressed. And maybe not necessarily all the time, but maybe towards the end it starts to become more frequent, because when they finally get to Act 3, there are consequences to the events. Every time they fail to help someone, people die, or people get hurt, or a land gets burned. They are the heroes after all. And I mean that even if they don't want to be, people need them, and it's their time to shine, so you need to force that kind of hand and light a fire under them, sometimes literally. And this creates a world of constant consequences for them. And the point of this is that the players now know the villain, they understand the goals of that villain, they might even agree with them, but they don't agree with the way they're doing it. And that build up to that big fight is sort of the final opportunities, right, to prep and test them. Send their commanders, send the hordes, give them fun fights where they mow down the enemies that used to be really, really tough and mow them down by the pile. And then also give them tough fights to remind them that they are still a little squishy. And the last few mini bosses are honestly my favorites because you get to get really creative with those. And then once you get through all that, then you get to the big boss fight. You have a whole arc with your characters. They are no longer the same PCs that they were 19 levels ago or 10 levels ago or whatever, and they are ready, or at least as ready as they can be. So they make their peace, they make their final arrangements, they pray to their gods, and then in the blink of an eye, they are standing in the final arena. And how long that takes, how long all of those arrangements, those preparations, any downtime that you want to give them, that's completely up to you. But eventually they are standing in that final arena. And I also just want to say that designing a good fight, I think, is all about stages, and it's not really about how much HP that the enemy has, right? I don't personally think that a slogfest for the bottom of the HP bar is that great. I think that's really boring, actually. And I think that having a multi-staged fight with multiple enemies and lots of transformations and different arenas and lots of powers and lair effects, that's way more fun to me, but that's a whole other video. And what's cool about these final fights is that you can do some really cool stuff. It doesn't have to be, I will destroy you forever, you can't stop me, right? It can be a fight where the villain wants to die, but on their terms. They know their time has come, they won't go down without a fight, so it becomes this really intense, brutal fight, and that would be fun to roleplay, at least for me. You can also add things like moral choices, right? Defeat the villain, but at a cost. If they stick around and fight, the town gets flooded, but if they don't stop the villain, then the world ends, so they have to sort of let the town flood. Or find a way to split the party and do that, right? Which could lead to more consequences and things like that. But you could also just let the villain plead, or he laughs, or he tells the truth right before he dies. Or maybe the villain was right and just too far gone, right? The ending should reflect the world that the villain has helped shape, and even if they die, their impact remains. Let it haunt the players in a good way. So all of that is to say that your BBEG isn't just a stat block. They are a presence, they are a force, they are a scar across your world, and you can build them in 3 acts. In Act 1, everything that you're doing, you're building to get them to know this person's name, who are they, and then learn to fear it. And in Act 2, you're trying to understand everything underneath that name. What is the bad guy down to the core? What is in the center of their soul? To get them to understand a little more. And then make it personal, make the bad guy really, really hate the party, and start to attack them. And then Act 3 becomes you building towards the climax and eventually feeling that fallout. And now it's time for some quick shout-outs. Assassin Charizard says, Tobias is the best little detail to keep track of. You know what? I always love seeing you in the comments. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the comment. Noah Rice 3362 says, the perfect distraction. Nice one, Tobias. Gives us a reason to look at you and not the notes. Love this one. Definitely an interesting concept and well worthwhile for making more unique worlds. I love messing around with more obscure concepts for world building every once in a while. It's lots of fun. Science just adds a little bit more interesting to the table. And you know what? Honestly, that's what I'm saying. Science just makes it better. And Tobias Cancelier 6972 says, hi, Tobias, we almost have the same name. I really hope I said that correctly. And if you were paying attention in today's video, leave a comment down below with a timestamp with where you saw Tobias. I don't remember how to speak today. I'm tired. Leave it down below, and you just might get shouted out in the next video. That's how this works. Anyways, I hope you found this useful. Yet again, I fear I may have just ranted at you. Let me know in the comments down below what you do to make your villains better. Also, if you see any negative comments, just type Tobias in all caps, just to confuse them. As always, thank you so much for watching. For John, my friends, and I'll see you next time, adventurers.